Tonight, Kevin Foley borrows big to fix the transport system. Business happy about payroll tax, but unions remain angry. Scores of arrests in a major pornography sting. And Hillary Clinton set to finally concede defeat during the weekend. Good evening, Dominique Schwartz with ABC News. The state government is borrowing heavily to fund a $2 billion overhaul of South Australia's ageing rail system. Over the next 10 years, trains will be electrified and the tram service extended to Port Adelaide. Windfall tax revenue has helped the government deliver a large budget surplus, but it's giving some of the money back to small business and first home buyers. State political reporter Nick Harmson.
It's budget number 7 for Kevin Foley, and with an election less than 2 years away, he's doing his best to keep the message fresh.
This budget is all about action now for the future.
It's also surplus number 7, $373 million, 12 times the initial forecast and driven by a higher than expected tax take and increased GST revenue. Mr Foley's planning more of the same, $160 million next year, to see the state's AAA credit rating retained. He'll need both surpluses to begin paying back borrowings for infrastructure, which will see the fiscal deficit rise to $548 million. By 2012, government debt will increase to nearly $2 billion. A sizable chunk of that will go towards the budget's centrepiece, the biggest ever overhaul of the state's rail network. The 10-year plan includes electrifying the Noarlunga, Gawler and Outer Harbour lines and a tram extension to the entertainment centre by 2010. This will then hook up with the Outer Harbour train line, which will also carry trams to Football Park by 2015 and all the way to Semaphore by 2018.
What about the forgotten south? What about the neglected north? This government needs to get its priorities right.
All told, the changes will cost $2 billion for infrastructure and new rolling stock.
More trams, more trains, more buses.
There will be 6 more trams in the near future to ease crowding on the Glenelg line. And they may be needed. Motorists already forking out more for petrol will have to pay an extra $28 for third-party insurance. Most other fees and charges will increase by up to 3.5%. The government is trying to ease the burden on first home buyers with a $4,000 grant for houses valued up to $400,000. That's on top of the existing $7,000 grant and replaces current stamp duty concessions. But there's no change to stamp duty itself or land tax. There is a tax cut for small business. The payroll tax threshold will increase by nearly $100,000 over 2 years. And there'll be a slight cut in the rate down to 4.95%, the second lowest in the nation.
By 2010, we will have abolished $3 billion worth of personal and business taxes.
There's $462 million for new health initiatives, although just $14.3 million for the proposed Marjorie Jackson Nelson Hospital in this budget to prepare the site. $70 million will be spent upgrading school buildings, including 10 new school upgrades. And there's $97 million towards the Port Stanvac desalination plant. But there's significant pain for the public service, which will have to find nearly $300 million worth of savings over the next 4 years. That will probably mean job losses, but the Treasurer says frontline services like teachers and police will be immune.
It's the right application of pressure that I do in most budgets to keep the public service as efficient as I can.
The Treasurer cannot be serious if he's talking about job cuts.
Government spending will increase 1.3% ahead of inflation to about $12.5 billion. The economy's coming off the boil. Growth will slow to 2.75%, as will employment growth, down to 1.25%. Nick Harmson, ABC News, Adelaide.
Reaction to the budget has been fairly predictable. The cut to payroll tax has delighted business groups, but there's anger from some unions which say the Labor government has left workers out in the cold. Jason Om reports.
Kevin Foley's big spend on trains and trams has some travellers already on board.
It's a nice direct way through. They were here originally. Put them back.
The more public transport, the better, in terms of the environment and petrol costs.
The property sector says the transport plan will drive a housing boom through the suburbs, and it says that'll be kicked along by a boost to the home buyers grant. But property taxes are still a sticking point.
We're very disappointed that there's no relief on land tax or stamp duty in this budget. We clearly have an uncompetitive regime in South Australia.
First home buyers will be winners. The general population of South Australia will miss out through no changes being made to stamp duty.
Overall, business seems to love the budget, especially the cuts to payroll tax.
South Australia will be the second most competitive state in the whole of Australia.
But there are no sweeteners for the unions.
We've seen a windfall to business of over $200 million in this budget, and we know that injured workers in South Australia will lose $100 million out of their own pay packets.
Teachers are furious their pay demands have been called excessive and say there's not enough money for schools.
The $306 million that's been put on the table is clearly not enough to address the issues that are facing this state in order to attract and retain education workers. Doctors and nurses say wages and growing patient queues haven't been addressed and that people in the bush will suffer.
We see a 3 to 4% decrease in funding in real terms for country areas.
The situation is not being addressed in a serious manner and we face losing workforce, quite frankly.
There's a big tick from welfare groups on the government's response to the Mulligan abuse inquiry.
This budget has delivered on support for our children, support for kids at risk.
But they're concerned the most vulnerable will be hit hard by higher government fees and charges.
I think people will struggle. We've seen such a significant increase in the cost of living.
Disabled groups say they've been left out again and still have the lowest funding in the nation. Jason Om, ABC News, Adelaide.
To hear more from the architect of the state budget, we'll cross now to Parliament House, where our political reporter Nick Harmson is joined by Treasurer Kevin Foley.
Thanks, Dominique. Well, after weeks of speculation and guesswork as to whether transport would be the big-ticket item of the budget, it's proved to be the case. It's now up to Kevin Foley to sell his $2 billion 10-year plan, and the Treasurer joins me now. Treasurer, you've really been forced into this, though, by months or if not years of negative publicity over South Australia's rail network.
No, not at all. What we have been doing is responding to decades of neglect by all sides of politics on critical infrastructure. Over the life of this Rand Labor government, we will have rebuilt our schools, our hospitals, a brand new Marjorie Jackson Nelson, best state-of-the-art hospital in the world, built here, new prisons, and now a 10-year plan to totally rebuild and electrify our state's transport system, 80 new buses, 9 million more passenger journeys. Labor government is about rebuilding vital state infrastructure.
The state opposition says that you're looking after some key Labor seats in the western suburbs. Indeed, the trams will now run into your seat of Port Adelaide. Is that the case?
Look, Martin Hamilton Smith can only ever knock, complain and criticise. There's never anything constructive or indeed accepting that sometimes government does get it right. The first train line to be electrified will be down the southern corridor, reaching out to the southern suburbs down to Noarlunga. We're starting work almost immediately on the re-sleepering of the northern suburbs line. That'll be electrified, as will the outer harbour line. And why shouldn't people in the west, just like people in the north and the south, benefit from a greatly improved service? I mean, Mr Hamilton Smith has nothing to complain about other than the fact that he is not in government himself and is having to see a government govern well, providing improved services for the vast majority of families in South Australia.
Treasurer, just on another issue, BHP's desalination plant for the Upper Spencer Gulf, there seems to be some questions marks over that. There's no money for it in this budget. What's happening with it?
Well, whenever we decide to be a partner in that project, that is in what we say the out years and years to come, we may well and almost certainly probably will be a partner to that project, but there has been some hitches along the way in that the quality of the water that BHP need for Roxby Downs is not a quality of water that we can easily provide as drinking water to the Upper Spencer Gulf town. So clearly we have to reevaluate what that means to the government. Sensible work, and that's caution and careful and prudence is the hallmark of this government when it comes to finances.
Treasurer, thank you very much for your time. I know you've got a busy couple of days ahead of you selling the budget.
Look forward to it.
Dominique, back to you.
Thanks, Nick. On to other news.